It began with a sealed discussion at Sandringham House, so unexpected that even senior courtiers reportedly struggled to explain it. Within hours, whispers raced through royal corridors, and a single name surfaced again and again: Princess Charlotte. What appeared to be a routine family matter soon transformed into one of the most explosive inheritance revelations in recent royal history. And if the reports were true, the consequences would reach far beyond Britain's most famous estate. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, almost nobody believed the rumors. Royal households have always generated speculation, and palace aides are accustomed to dismissing stories before they gain momentum. Yet this situation felt different. Reports suggest that senior advisors were summoned to an urgent private meeting connected to long-term estate planning, a gathering that immediately attracted attention because of the unusual level of secrecy surrounding it. Normally, discussions involving royal property are carefully managed behind closed doors, but according to palace insiders, this particular meeting created a sense of tension that could not be hidden. Staff members reportedly noticed schedules being rearranged, communications becoming unusually restricted, and conversations abruptly ending whenever certain names were mentioned. What truly fueled the mystery was the sudden appearance of Princess Charlotte's name in discussions that many assumed concerned future generations rather than present-day decisions. For years, royal watchers had operated under a series of assumptions about how major family assets might eventually pass from one generation to the next. Those assumptions had become so widely accepted that few people ever questioned them. But now, according to growing reports, long-established expectations were being challenged in ways that nobody anticipated. The possibility that Charlotte had become connected to historic estate documents sent shockwaves through royal circles. Not because of her position within the family, but because of what such a connection might represent. As whispers intensified, competing theories began emerging from different corners of the royal world. Some observers suggested that the discussions reflected routine succession planning. Others believed something much more significant was unfolding behind palace walls. Reports claimed that different branches of the family held very different expectations regarding the future of certain royal properties, creating a quiet undercurrent of tension that had remained hidden from public view for years. The more journalists investigated, the more questions emerged. Why was Charlotte's name suddenly appearing in conversations about one of the monarchy's most treasured estates? Why had advisors reportedly treated the matter with such extraordinary caution? And perhaps most importantly, what information was still being kept from the public? With every passing day, speculation intensified. Leaks began surfacing. Commentators started connecting old rumors to new developments, and what had once seemed impossible slowly started appearing plausible. Yet even as attention focused on Charlotte, many believed they were only seeing part of the story. Because behind the inheritance rumors, behind the private meetings, and behind the growing media frenzy, there appeared to be a deeper secret, one rooted in history, tradition, and a legacy so sensitive that generations had treated it almost as forbidden knowledge. But the shock surrounding Charlotte's inheritance only made sense once the true significance of Sandringham and its forbidden legacy was finally revealed. For generations, Sandringham was more than land, more than property, more than wealth. It was a symbol of continuity, a private sanctuary woven into the identity of the monarchy itself. Yet hidden beneath decades of tradition was a question few dared ask publicly. Who would ultimately inherit its future? The answer seemed obvious, until suddenly it wasn't. To understand why the reports surrounding Princess Charlotte created such an extraordinary reaction, it is necessary to understand what Sandringham truly represents. For many people, it is simply a royal estate, a vast property associated with Christmas gatherings, family traditions, and some of the monarchy's most private moments. But within royal history, Sandringham has always occupied a far more complicated place. Unlike many properties connected to the crown, Sandringham has long been viewed as something deeply personal. It exists in a space where family legacy and royal duty intersect, making every discussion about its future intensely sensitive. That distinction matters because it transforms inheritance from a financial matter into a question of identity, continuity, and power. For decades, assumptions about Sandringham's future seemed settled. Royal observers, historians, and commentators often treated the estate's eventual inheritance as a predictable chapter in a story already written. The monarchy thrives on tradition, and tradition creates expectations. Over time, those expectations become so deeply embedded that few people imagine they could ever change. Yet beneath that appearance of certainty, reports suggest that private discussions regarding long-term succession planning have quietly evolved for years. As one generation prepared to pass responsibilities to the next, questions emerged that could no longer be ignored. How should historic estates be protected? Who should carry their legacy forward? And what role would younger members of the royal family ultimately play? Those questions became even more significant as public attention increasingly shifted toward the monarchy's future. With every major royal event, every succession discussion, and every debate about modernization, the importance of preserving historic institutions grew stronger. Sandringham was not simply being viewed as a valuable asset. It was being viewed as a living symbol of continuity between generations. That reality placed enormous weight on any decision connected to its future stewardship. According to growing speculation, advisors and family members alike understood that whoever became linked to Sandringham would inherit far more than land. They would inherit responsibility, expectation, and the burden of protecting a legacy stretching back across generations. What made the emerging reports so explosive was the growing suggestion that long-standing assumptions may no longer apply. The certainty that once surrounded future beneficiaries suddenly appeared less certain. Commentators who had spent years discussing royal succession found themselves confronting new possibilities. Palace insiders reportedly described increasing curiosity about how inheritance plans might reflect the monarchy's future priorities rather than its past expectations. Every leak, every rumor, and every whispered conversation seemed to point toward the same unsettling conclusion. Something significant had changed. As speculation intensified, historians began revisiting forgotten chapters of Sandringham's history, searching for clues hidden within decades of royal precedent. What they found only deepened the mystery. Because the estate's story had always been shaped by family decisions, private arrangements, and competing expectations. And now, as new questions emerged about Charlotte's connection to that legacy, another narrative was beginning to take shape beneath the surface. One that involved different branches of the family, different visions of the future, and ambitions that were quietly moving toward an unavoidable collision. And as historians revisited Sandringham's past, another story began emerging, one involving competing family expectations that would soon collide. Behind closed doors, inheritance discussions rarely become public spectacles, yet according to growing reports, assumptions regarding Archie's future connection to key royal assets had quietly circulated for years. Whether based on expectation, speculation, or misunderstanding, those assumptions suddenly faced a dramatic reality check when Charlotte's position appeared to strengthen. The deeper investigators looked into the Sandringham story, the more they discovered that the estate itself was only part of a much larger conversation. For years, public discussion surrounding Archie's future royal role had generated endless debate among commentators, royal watchers, and members of the public. Some believed that changing circumstances within the monarchy would eventually create new opportunities for younger members of the family, while others argued that proximity to the throne would always remain the defining factor in decisions involving major royal responsibilities and assets. Those competing viewpoints existed quietly in the background for years, rarely attracting serious attention. But the moment Charlotte's name became linked to Sandringham's future, those old assumptions returned with extraordinary force. What made the situation especially sensitive was the growing contrast between public expectations and private royal decision-making. Outside palace walls, narratives often develop based on symbolism, popularity, and perception. Inside royal institutions, however, decisions are frequently shaped by long-term planning, succession considerations, and the preservation of historic traditions. According to reports emerging from royal circles, this gap between public understanding and private reality may have been far wider than many realized. As discussions intensified, commentators began revisiting years of speculation, searching for clues that might explain why expectations had developed the way they had. The answers were anything but simple. For some observers, Archie represented a younger generation whose future within the broader royal story remained a subject of fascination. For others, inheritance questions inevitably returned to issues of bloodline, succession, and direct connection to the monarchy's future leadership. Those conversations became increasingly emotional as rumors surrounding Charlotte gained momentum. Every new report seemed to fuel another wave of analysis. Every leaked detail appeared to challenge a previously accepted assumption. The result was a growing atmosphere of uncertainty in which long-standing beliefs were being tested against emerging realities. Palace insiders reportedly understood the risks. Sources suggested that efforts were quietly made to prevent speculation from spiraling out of control. Yet the more officials attempted to maintain silence, the more curiosity intensified, questions multiplied. Had expectations regarding future inheritance been misunderstood from the beginning? Were public narratives based on assumptions rather than documented arrangements? And why did reports increasingly point toward Charlotte as a central figure in discussions that many had once believed would follow a very different path? As media's interest expanded, competing interpretations began colliding in public view. Royal commentators offered conflicting explanations. Analysts debated whether recent developments reflected a symbolic shift or something far more significant. The uncertainty itself became part of the story. Behind every rumor seemed to be another unanswered question. Behind every explanation appeared to be another contradiction, and as inheritance details gradually became clearer, one reality emerged above all others. Expectations that had once seemed secure were now being openly challenged. Yet even amid the speculation, some observers warned that the most important revelations had not yet surfaced, because rumors, assumptions, and competing narratives can only shape a story for so long. Eventually, evidence begins to emerge. Eventually, paperwork replaces conjecture. And according to growing reports, that moment was rapidly approaching. Hidden beneath the debate was a trail of records, arrangements, and historic decisions that promised to reveal far more than anyone expected. But speculation soon gave way to something far more powerful, a document trail that appeared to change everything. Every royal controversy eventually reaches the same destination: paperwork. Not speeches, not headlines, not public appearances, documents. And according to reports circulating among royal observers, a series of inheritance records and family arrangements suddenly became the center of attention, revealing a path few had anticipated. The atmosphere surrounding the Sandringham story changed dramatically the moment attention shifted, away from rumors and toward records. Speculation can dominate headlines for days, even weeks, but documents possess a different kind of power. They have a way of cutting through assumptions and forcing difficult questions into the open. According to reports emerging from royal circles, inheritance records, estate arrangements, and long-standing family planning documents suddenly became the focus of intense scrutiny. What had once been treated as palace gossip was now being examined through the lens of paperwork that allegedly stretched back across years of careful succession planning, and the deeper observers looked, the more complicated the picture became. Royal legal teams were reportedly drawn into discussions as questions surrounding historic arrangements grew more significant. Behind every major estate lies a network of decisions made long before headlines ever appear. Wills, trusts, stewardship agreements, and inheritance structures often exist quietly in the background, shaping outcomes that the public rarely sees until years later. Sources suggested that advisors began reviewing those arrangements with renewed urgency as speculation surrounding Sandringham intensified. The goal was not simply to understand who might inherit what. It was to understand why certain decisions may have been made and what those decisions revealed about the monarchy's vision for its future. That process proved far more complex than many expected. Courtiers and commentators reportedly found themselves navigating a maze of interconnected arrangements, each carrying implications that extended beyond a single generation. Every detail appeared connected to another. Every answer seemed to create two new questions. The more observers attempted to interpret the structure of inheritance planning, the more they discovered how carefully royal estates are often positioned to preserve continuity rather than satisfy public expectations. That distinction became increasingly important as Charlotte's name appeared more frequently within discussions surrounding the estate's future. At the same time, broader questions began emerging about preservation itself. Sandringham was never viewed merely as a possession. It represented tradition, stewardship, and the responsibility of carrying something historic into an uncertain future. According to growing reports, estate preservation strategies became a major focus of discussion. Analysts questioned whether long-term planning decisions had been designed to protect continuity above all else. If so, the implications extended far beyond a single inheritance story. They touched on the very principles guiding the monarchy's future direction. As media outlets examined separate pieces of information, patterns slowly began taking shape. Isolated rumors that once seemed unrelated suddenly appeared connected. Historical decisions were revisited. Previous reports were re-examined. Commentary that had once been dismissed gained new attention. Piece by piece, a broader narrative emerged, and within that narrative, Charlotte's reported position appeared increasingly significant. What had initially looked like a surprising development was beginning to resemble part of a much larger framework that may have been developing quietly for years. The effect was immediate. Public debate intensified. Analysts revisited old assumptions. Royal watchers who had once viewed the story as speculation now found themselves confronting a growing body of information pointing in a consistent direction. Yet for all the attention focused on documents, records, and inheritance structures, some insiders suggested the most dramatic moment had not yet arrived, because understanding paperwork was one thing. Understanding its consequences was something else entirely. And according to reports circulating among palace observers, those consequences became impossible to ignore when senior members of the royal family were reportedly confronted with the full meaning behind what the documents revealed. Yet even those revelations were overshadowed by what happened when senior royals reportedly learned the full implications. Few events create more tension inside royal circles than inheritance decisions. Titles can be debated, roles can be reassigned, but estates carry history, symbolism, and power. According to palace insiders, reactions to the Sandringham reports ranged from surprise to disbelief as the implications became impossible to ignore. The moment discussions moved beyond rumors and into the realm of consequences, the atmosphere surrounding the Sandringham story changed completely. Until then, many observers had treated the inheritance reports as another chapter in a long-running cycle of royal speculation. But according to palace insiders, the situation became far more serious once senior family members were reportedly briefed on the developments and the possible implications connected to Charlotte's growing association with the estate. Suddenly, this was no longer a story about leaked information or competing theories. It had become a story about legacy, responsibility, and a future that some believed was already beginning to take shape. Reports suggest that private reactions varied widely across royal circles. Some were said to be surprised by the scale of public interest, while others reportedly focused on what the inheritance narrative might signal about long-term planning inside the monarchy. What united many of those reactions, however, was the recognition that Sandringham occupies a unique place within royal history. It is not simply an estate that can be discussed in purely practical terms. For generations, it has carried emotional significance far beyond its boundaries. Family memories, historic traditions, and personal connections have all become intertwined with its identity. As a result, any suggestion that its future direction had changed was bound to provoke powerful responses. Courtiers reportedly found themselves attempting to interpret a rapidly evolving situation. The challenge was not simply understanding inheritance structures. It was understanding what those structures might communicate. In royal life, symbolism often carries as much weight as reality. A single decision can trigger years of analysis because people inevitably search for deeper meaning beneath the surface. According to sources familiar with palace discussions, that exact process was unfolding as advisors, commentators, and family associates attempted to assess what Charlotte's reported position could mean for the future. At the same time, concerns about public perception reportedly became impossible to ignore. Media coverage intensified as analysts connected previous rumors to emerging developments. Every new report generated another round of debate. Every interpretation seemed to create fresh questions. Palace officials were said to be monitoring the growing attention carefully, aware that inheritance stories possess a unique ability to capture public imagination. The challenge was maintaining stability while speculation expanded beyond the walls of royal residences and into headlines around the world. The emotional dimension of the story only made matters more complicated. For some observers, the discussion centered on stewardship and continuity. For others, it focused on expectation and disappointment. Different royal households reportedly examined the situation through very different lenses, weighing not only what the reports suggested today, but what they might mean years into the future. Those conversations gradually evolved into a larger debate about legacy itself. Who should preserve historic institutions? How should responsibility be passed from one generation to the next? And what role should symbolism play in shaping those decisions? As those questions grew louder, Palace efforts to maintain calm reportedly continued behind the scenes. Yet the more stability officials attempted to project, the more intense public curiosity became. People sensed that the discussion had expanded beyond Sandringham alone. Beneath the inheritance reports lay something larger, something more consequential. The estate had become a focal point for a much deeper conversation about the monarchy's direction, its priorities, and the generation that would eventually define its future. And as reactions continued dominating headlines, another realization slowly emerged from the growing debate, one that threatened to reshape the entire meaning of the controversy. And while reactions dominated headlines, the deeper issue was only beginning to emerge: the future shape of the monarchy itself. The story was never simply about property. It was about what the property represented. Sandringham stood as a bridge between generations, linking monarchs past, present, and future. If Charlotte truly stood at the center of its future, the symbolism would be impossible to overlook. By this stage, the conversation surrounding Sandringham had evolved far beyond inheritance. The estate had become a symbol within a symbol, a story that seemed to reveal deeper truths about where the monarchy believed it was heading. For weeks, attention had focused on documents, succession planning, and competing expectations. Yet beneath all of those discussions lay a more profound question. Why did Charlotte's reported connection to Sandringham matter so much? The answer, according to many royal observers, had little to do with ownership and everything to do with representation. Sandringham was not simply a place, it was a statement. And if Charlotte had indeed become increasingly linked to its future, that statement carried enormous weight. In recent years, Charlotte's visibility within the royal family has steadily grown. While still young, she has become one of the most closely watched members of the next generation. Every public appearance, every milestone, and every glimpse into her evolving role has attracted attention from people eager to understand what the future of the monarchy may look like. That fascination exists because Charlotte occupies a unique position within the royal story. She is not merely part of the next generation. She represents continuity, stability, and the possibility of a future that extends far beyond current headlines and controversies. That reality becomes even more significant when viewed through the lens of succession. Throughout royal history, symbolic decisions have often carried long-term meaning. Responsibilities, associations, and traditions are rarely assigned without careful consideration. According to royal historians, seemingly small choices can sometimes reveal how institutions envision their future decades in advance. This is why the reports surrounding Sandringham captured such widespread attention. If Charlotte's position within the narrative was strengthening, many believed it could signal confidence in her future role long before that role fully emerges. Observers quickly began drawing parallels with earlier generations of royals whose paths were shaped through symbolism as much as formal titles. History is filled with examples of younger family members gradually being connected to responsibilities that would later define their public identity. In many cases, those connections were subtle at first. They appeared insignificant to outsiders, yet with time their meaning became unmistakable. That historical context added another layer of intrigue to the Sandringham story. What seemed like an inheritance discussion suddenly appeared connected to a much larger narrative about preparation, trust, and continuity. Public fascination only intensified as these interpretations spread. For many people, Charlotte represents a future chapter that has yet to be written. She embodies possibility. That is why every report connected to her role generates enormous interest. People are not simply reacting to current events. They are imagining what those events might mean years from now. Could Sandringham represent an early signal of future responsibilities? Could the estate's symbolic importance reflect a broader vision for the monarchy's next generation? Those questions fueled endless debate because no definitive answers emerged. Yet perhaps the most powerful aspect of the story was what it suggested about confidence. Throughout history, institutions preserve what they value most carefully. If reports surrounding Charlotte's connection to Sandringham proved accurate, many believed they reflected more than inheritance planning. They reflected trust in continuity itself. But even as that interpretation gained momentum, one final mystery remained unresolved because symbolism, no matter how powerful, could not answer the question that now dominated public discussion. A question that seemed to grow louder with every passing day and every new report. But even that symbolism was eclipsed by one final question that observers everywhere were asking. As headlines exploded across the world, Attention shifted to one phrase that appeared repeatedly in royal commentary: claim blocked. Whether interpreted legally, symbolically, or politically, those words transformed a private inheritance story into an international debate about royal legacy and entitlement. What began as whispers inside palace corridors had now become a global conversation. Newspapers, commentators, royal historians, and millions of online observers suddenly found themselves focused on a single question: what exactly did claim blocked mean? The phrase appeared simple, yet its implications seemed enormous. Depending on who was discussing it, those words carried entirely different meanings. Some viewed them as evidence of a legal reality that had always existed beneath the surface. Others saw them as a symbolic declaration about the future direction of the monarchy. And still others believed the phrase represented something political, reflecting broader decisions about legacy, continuity, and responsibility. Whatever interpretation people favored, one thing was undeniable: the controversy had expanded far beyond Sandringham itself. At the center of the debate was an important distinction that many observers argued had been overlooked for years: the difference between expectation and entitlement. Public narratives often create assumptions that feel real simply because they are repeated often enough. Over time, speculation can become accepted as probability, and probability can begin to resemble certainty. Yet inheritance decisions rarely operate according to public perception. They operate according to arrangements, structures, and long-term planning that frequently remain hidden from view. As analysts examined the growing reports, many suggested that this distinction lay at the heart of the entire controversy. What some people believed might happen and what was actually planned could be two very different things. That realization intensified discussion across every corner of the royal world. Analysts debated whether the reports reflected a dramatic change or merely the revelation of plans that had existed quietly for years. Some argued that Charlotte's reported position represented a natural continuation of succession principles already embedded within royal traditions. Others questioned whether the story pointed toward a broader shift in how future responsibilities might be distributed among younger generations. Each interpretation generated new headlines, each headline generated new debate, and with every passing day, public fascination grew stronger. Online reactions quickly became a story of their own. Supporters of competing viewpoints defended their interpretations with extraordinary passion. Social media platforms filled with theories, predictions, and emotional arguments about inheritance, fairness, and royal tradition. What had started as a discussion about an estate was now evolving into a much larger conversation about identity, legacy, and the future of the institution itself. The intensity of those reactions revealed something important. People were no longer discussing land. They were discussing what the land represented. Royal experts offered competing explanations, further fueling the uncertainty. Some emphasized historical precedent. Others highlighted succession realities. A few suggested that the truth likely existed somewhere between the competing narratives dominating public discourse. Yet despite the growing volume of commentary, one voice remained noticeably restrained: the palace itself. According to reports, official responses remained limited, creating an information vacuum that only encouraged further speculation. Silence became its own form of communication. Every unanswered question seemed to invite another theory. Every refusal to comment appeared to deepen the mystery. And as that silence continued, the significance of the controversy grew larger than anyone had anticipated. The debate was no longer centered on a single inheritance decision. It had become a reflection of deeper anxieties and expectations surrounding the monarchy's future. Questions about succession, stewardship, continuity, and responsibility had merged into a single unfolding narrative. The estate remained important, but it was no longer the true focus. Something larger was emerging from the controversy, something capable of influencing royal discussions long after the headlines faded. And in the silence that followed, a new reality seemed to take shape, one that could define royal discussions for years to come. The final outcome may not be remembered solely because of who inherited what. Instead, it may be remembered because it revealed how the monarchy sees its future. Beneath the headlines, beneath the controversy, and beneath the speculation lay a deeper message about legacy, responsibility, and the next generation of royals preparing to inherit history itself. As the noise surrounding Sandringham slowly began to settle, a different perspective started emerging. For months, public attention had focused on questions of inheritance, competing expectations, and the dramatic phrase that had dominated royal commentary. Yet when observers stepped back and looked at the story as a whole, many realized that the true significance of the controversy extended far beyond any individual claim. What made the story remarkable was not simply the debate over an estate. It was the glimpse it appeared to offer into how the monarchy may be preparing for the decades ahead. Throughout royal history, moments that initially seemed controversial often became important for entirely different reasons. Decisions that sparked intense public debate were later remembered as turning points that revealed larger institutional priorities. According to many commentators, the Sandringham story carried that same potential. The estate itself was important, but what mattered even more was the message hidden beneath the discussion. A message about stewardship, a message about continuity, and perhaps most importantly, a message about the next generation that will eventually carry the weight of royal responsibility into the future. At the center of that conversation stood Princess Charlotte. Over the course of the controversy, her name gradually evolved from a surprising detail into one of the story's defining elements. For many observers, that transformation reflected something larger than inheritance. It reflected growing recognition that younger members of the royal family are increasingly becoming symbols of what comes next. The monarchy has always depended on continuity. It survives because one generation prepares the next to inherit not only titles and responsibilities, but also traditions, expectations, and obligations that stretch back centuries. In that context, Charlotte's reported connection to Sandringham appeared to represent far more than ownership. It represented trust in the future. That interpretation helped explain why public fascination remained so intense. People were not simply reacting to reports about an estate. They were responding to the possibility that they were witnessing an early chapter in a much longer story. Questions surrounding succession, responsibility, and legacy naturally attract attention because they force people to think beyond the present moment. They encourage speculation about what the monarchy might look like years from now and who will ultimately shape its direction. The Sandringham debate became a focal point for those larger questions. Even as discussions continued, important lessons emerged from the controversy. One lesson involved the difference between expectation and reality. Another centered on the enduring importance of tradition within institutions built on continuity. Yet perhaps the most significant lesson involved stewardship itself. Royal estates, historic responsibilities, and family legacies are rarely viewed as personal possessions alone. They are often seen as obligations that must be preserved and protected for future generations. That idea appeared repeatedly throughout discussions surrounding Sandringham and became one of the defining themes of the entire story. In the end, the controversy may be remembered less for the arguments it generated and more for the questions it raised. Questions about the future, questions about continuity, questions about the generation that will eventually inherit the responsibilities currently carried by others. As those questions continue to evolve, one reality appears increasingly clear. The monarchy's future is becoming more closely linked to its younger generation, and stories like this offer rare insight into how that future may be taking shape. The headlines will eventually move on, the speculation will fade, new controversies will emerge, yet the larger themes revealed by the Sandringham debate will remain, continuing to influence discussions about royal legacy for years to come. Because while headlines fade and controversies pass, the decisions surrounding legacy endure, and the story of Sandringham may only be the beginning. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.